Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 27 of the Backyard Banter podcast. My name is Matt Harmon. I'm here with you every step of the way in this little journey that we're taking with this show. And if you've been following along, you know that what we're doing here is we are interviewing some of the best people in the football industry, whether it's writing, video, NFL draft, fantasy football, this, that, or the other. Today, we've got someone from a website we've not heard anybody from yet. We have the senior NFL analyst or senior analyst at Pro Football Focus, Steve Palazzolo. Steve, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me. I've listened to not all 26 previous, but a big chunk of them. I like the concept, like what you're doing here.
Well, I appreciate that. It would be impossible to actually listen to 26 because I'm peeling back the curtain. I literally just recorded episode 26 about an hour. Like
it's on the black market already, Matt.
Oh, wow.
You could find it.
Yeah, man, that is impressive, Steve. Well, clearly your happenings around the internet don't just include football. Clearly, it includes hacking my computer during podcasting, which is again very impressive, and I'm flattered by the interest. I've never had anybody hack me before, so that's a compliment. But Steve, I kind of always start the podcasts asking people how they came to love the game of football or evaluation and all that sort of stuff. And I know you come from kind of a completely different background than anybody that we've had on the show before. So how did you first kind of come to fall in love with the game of football?
Yeah, I mean, my background is in baseball, and that was my first love, my first passion. So when I was a kid, 34 now, that's rough. When I was a kid, baseball cards, back of baseball cards, I loved stats. I loved following the game that way. So that was my first passion when I was probably about 7 years old. Wanted to learn and know everything about baseball, wanted to become a professional baseball player, and actually got, the opportunity to live that dream for 8 years. And, along the way, I started to love football too during my teenage years, but baseball was always my number one priority. So, my teenage years, I started from the New England area. The Patriots were always terrible growing up, and the team I first adopted actually was the Jaguars in 1996.
Oh, wow.
Was the first time I really started watching football, mostly on a weekly basis, and loved Mark Brunell and that passing game, Jimmy Smith, Keenan McCardell, and approached football in a similar way to baseball, where I loved the stats, the numbers, and passing games and things like that. So I picked up and then of course, I'm part of the Madden generation, so being able to Madden 95, I think, was the first game I got addicted to, and then got every game since. And a lot of that helped fuel the passion, and just loved watching the NFL and loved watching college football as well. I love the dynamics of both, and I love seeing players go from college to the NFL. I think like most of the people that are on here, we're all fascinated by the evaluation process, and I was always fascinated by the evaluation process of baseball and in football. So I played college baseball, went undrafted, played minor league baseball for 8 years, and then that was my focus. I mean, everything I wanted to do in my life was to become a major league baseball player. Put all my time and energy and efforts into that, and especially as an undrafted player coming out of college, and as a 6'10" pitcher that still had potential to live up to, I put all my passion into learning as much as I could about pitching and maximizing what I could do. So that was kind of my passion in, say, 2004 to 2008. It was really focused on that. And then I got to a point in my career where I'd made it to Double-A and was kind of knocking on the door to the big leagues, and had a small injury setback. And my off seasons at that time were fueled around training and researching and how do I get better at pitching? What can I do to get better at pitching? Every waking moment of my life was that. And I got to a point, not where I was content, but where it was almost overkill to overthink pitching as an athlete, thinking about every little move. So the 2008 offseason was one where I kind of needed to get away from what I used to do previously. I got away from what got me to the level that I got to from a pitching standpoint. And I said, I'm going to put some of this effort towards just football is going to be my my hobby, and I was just always fascinated by the X's and O's and what makes a play work and not work, and like I said, player evaluation. So I slowly switched my, say, off-season priorities, and it wasn't that I wasn't focused on baseball. It was just what I needed at that time. I needed a release, and um, by 2010 was the last time I got released in spring training by the Giants after a year in AAA. Got a quick shot with the Mariners in AAA and AA. Got released by them. Played independent ball for the rest of 2010, 2011, and then at the end of 2011, I didn't know that I was going to retire. I'd planned on playing in 2012, but Pro Football Focus was a website that I loved, always used. They started to make their premium stats too expensive for me to get at the time. I think they made it $100, and I loved the stats. I loved the way they broke down players. I loved that I could go look at a game and say, look at this linebacker that had 3 tackles and he played better than the linebacker that had 12 tackles, and the fact that they could define that and actually quantify that on a game by game basis. So I sent this very simple email September of 2011 or August of 2011. I said, do you guys need help? And they said, yes, we do. And they said, here's a practice game for our entry level position, and the entry level position is simply charting who's on the field, what they do, and it's pretty objective, pretty black and white, and I was really good at that. So that went a little bit beyond the passion. I can get into that a little bit more, but always had the passion, but I had to kind of refocus it a little bit toward the end of my baseball career, and it ended up very luckily turning into a career in football.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's definitely a lot of points I'd like to hit on in your story there, but one, just to start off. So you're 6'10". I mean,
yes.
Holy hell, that's tall. Because I'm 6'3", and I actually have a friend back home who's about 6'10". I think he might even be an inch taller than that. But it is incredible, and it's just funny to me because I'm almost always used to being like the tallest person in the room. When you get around somebody that's 6'10", it's and as like being 6'3", and I'm looking up at them, I'm just like, my God, I never hardly ever know what it feels like to be the short guy, and then I do, and it's weird. So it's
a different world. You hit your head a lot, A lot of people tell you that you're wasting your life because you're not playing basketball. I get that all the time. Making judgments about my life right in person and in public.
That is pretty offensive. But it's easy to walk in and kind of own a room, I imagine, or do you feel like you're kind of too tall and like you kind of stand out too much to own the room?
No, I'm good. I'm content, happy with my height. I'm good. It's more good than bad, and that was really what kept me going. The fact that I was 6'10", I had somebody tell me when I went undrafted, they said, look, you're always going to be 6'10". You'll always have this opportunity in baseball, because just like in football, size, speed, all that stuff matters. The fact that I was a 6'10" pitcher, I used to throw 88. So the fact, if I could get that up to 91, 92, which I did, I had the opportunity. Whereas if I was, 6'1", probably don't have that opportunity. So I'll take it. More good than bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. It's all about owning your body and everything like that, I guess. But it's funny that you mentioned the Madden generation, and we've talked about that a lot on the show. It really is. I found it was something that ignited my passion for football, which really I didn't give it. I'm visiting my dad right now. I'm at his beach house in North Carolina, and we were talking about it last night. How I really didn't give a damn about football like as a kid, but there's something about Madden when you get your hands on it and you're able to kind of create the franchise mode, and like I think you tweeted at Josh a little while ago, like that tinkering with the uniforms, even something so simple as that. It's so funny how that can really ignite the passion.
It's unbelievable, and we have discussions over here now at the PFF office, which I'm new to within the last 2 months. I think all of us that work in football full time must have, at this age, some kind of story about how we did franchise mode. I mean, how else can you duplicate the passion we're talking about, franchise mode and all those different things? And our best player participation guy, again, our entry level position is charting where everybody lines up on the field. And our best player participation guy knows every piece of equipment that everybody in the NFL plays wears, so that he can do that live. Essentially, he can have that process done, which is probably a 6 or 7 hour process. He gets it done live on our Sunday night football games and Monday night football games. It took me quite a bit longer, but when I ended up applying for the job, they sent me a game. They said, here, fill it out. and you need to do it to 99% accuracy. And I was able to do it because I was intrigued by who plays in the nickel for the Ravens. Who's the when the Patriots go to 3 wide receivers, who plays in the slot? Who lines up in the backfield in this set and that set. So a lot of that stuff that I was the Madden dork that wanted all of the rosters to look exactly right, and the uniforms to look right, the equipment, all that fun stuff. And that actually helped me with this entry-level position at PFF, which is charting where everybody lines up on the field, because that was easy for me. I already knew how to do that stuff because I was already following the NFL with that level of detail.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. And it's just something about everything like fires off a different portion of all of our brains. And there is something about that, I mean, like, I think we've all got, like, all of us, like, true Madden dorks. And I haven't even played the game, like, in the last 3 years. I just don't.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. I can't either at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Time-wise, and just at this point in my life. And, it's not to say, like, I'm better than anybody else, but, like, I just don't have any interest in video games or anything. My roommate, Alex, plays video games all the time. I can't even tell you the last time I actually, other than Mario Kart, can't tell you the last time I actually played a real video game. But growing up, I mean, yeah, it's something about that Madden generation. Like, we've all gotten the question, are you ever going to actually play games? I can't tell you how many times I had friends ask me that question. Like, oh, yeah, it's fun. But so kind of from your baseball career, obviously baseball is a very numbers, stats heavy thing, as a sport. And I don't know a damn thing about baseball. I've said that plenty of times on this podcast. My brain is already too much consumed with football that, like, if I tried to bring in any other sports, I would shut down and, like, forget where I live. And yeah, totally. So I guess my question there is, like, it's a little bit, and things are evolving, of course, with the current landscape of the NFL. But I guess probably back when you were first starting out at Pro Football Focus, football is definitely less of a numbers heavy thing. But do you think that what part of the baseball background kind of influences your football work now?
That's a good question. I think it's, you quantify stuff with receivers, and I just think quantifying anything makes it a little bit easier. The brain has a great way of remembering highlights. And it's why after we grade I will grade a game. So 8 hours, takes 6 to 8 hours, say, to grade a game. And we're looking at every player, every play, and grading how well did they play. And I can come out of that game and think, I think this guy played well. I think this guy played poorly. And then you look at our grades, and it's actually a little bit different from the perception. And I should be the expert on this thing. I just watched every play of the game in immense detail. But your brain plays tricks on you. It remembers highlights. It remembers lowlights. So when you can at least have something consistent that quantifies it, and I just think it's a little bit easier to take biases out of it. You always have to add context to things that are quantified. I think that's an extremely important part of the whole deal. But I think that's the biggest thing. Baseball just quantified a whole bunch of stuff and then tried to make sense of it. And I think football is just doing a better job of quantifying more stuff and trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's why I do what I do with, like you mentioned, with reception perception. And because there are some times that even as, like, I can totally agree with that, where I'm charting a receiver and, I feel like I'm like, man, this guy's doing really, really well. And then I'll tally up everything at the end and be like, oh, that was actually right. And because, like, yeah, and it's something that I preach all the time about negativity bias, or, your brain really emphasizing the lows or really emphasizing the highs. And that's why I like what you guys do. And anybody that's really doing analytics, that's quantifying watching film, is because it really does kind of take that emotional bias and just, puts things on a level playing field. And like you mentioned, context is important too, but yeah, totally. I agree. It's fun. It's fun to see the end result of that. Has there been anything that's kind of changed your opinion of the game since you started doing this sort of work?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think, well, we've got a call in the office that I don't need to take. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything that just off the top of my head. I mean, one thing is, it's not so much me changing my opinion, but I think it's finding an opinion that's a little bit different through numbers, is just, say, the value of the left tackle versus the right tackle, which is something I've written on before and harped on in the past. I think the NFL for years decided the left tackle is the most important position because it protects the blind side of the quarterback and all that fun stuff. But when you break down the numbers of where is the quarterback's blind side actually? Because if he's thrown to the left, that's where his eyes are, and his blind side is all of a sudden protected by the right tackle. And why do scouts say this guy can only play left tackle but not right tackle? Because he doesn't have the feet for a right tackle, when the reality is, well, the right tackle has to go block Von Miller, Cameron Wake, Justin Houston, Khalil Mack, all of these top pass rushers. Why are you going to put your second best pass protector over there? So say something like that, which I could go into probably half-hour level of detail about. I don't know that it's more something that I've learned through the years by watching the game and then having data to back it up. And I think that's one of the biggest things with what we do is we all have theories. I have theories on a lot of stuff based off what I think I've seen, but then you find the data to try to back it up either for or against. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, but it is nice to be able to take a theory and then test it out because you have some level of data to work with.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that if there's one thing in our society, and there's plenty of places that you see this in our world, that it's football is definitely one that's like built on, tradition, and we've always done it this way. So that's the way we're going to do it. And I would say that, sites like Pro Football Focus are definitely a part of kind of testing, like, but is that really important, or is that really true? And I would say that that's certainly something that you guys do well.
Yeah, it's something. It's funny because I saw it in baseball a little bit. I was one of the few baseball players that was into analytics, and it worked. That works for and against you at times too. Because how do I take, the information in baseball is, as a pitcher, and it should seem obvious even for a non-baseball fan like you, you're not supposed to walk guys as a pitcher, and you want to strike out a lot of guys. Now, how do I use that information as a pitcher? Do I try harder? What do I do to improve these things that I know are better for long-term success? So I had a feel for that type of stuff. So I was one of the few players that, knew about analytics. I actually, at the point where I was closest to getting called up to the big leagues, not that they were dialing my number or anything, but the closest I was also in the middle of probably the luckiest stretch from a statistical standpoint in my career. So like, what do I do with that information? Like, I stay lucky. And then when I got released, I was in one of the unluckiest stretches of my career. So now I could go back and complain and say, no, I was just unlucky. I'd actually gotten better. So I think it's hard I was one of the few players that knew that information and could use it. But I think my point is I would be in the clubhouse and hear guys say, the first time they used the advanced stat WAR on TV that I had seen, it was on SportsCenter, and I was in a AAA clubhouse, and they said, what does WAR mean? They put it up and they said, here's this guy's WAR, wins above replacement. And I said, well, guys, that means this is how many wins these guys are worth above us, the replacement guys, the guys that would replace this guy's value. So players had no idea in baseball about some of that stuff, and I think they do now. And I think football is kind of evolving to that point too, where players, you talk about this old way of doing things. Well, players don't need to necessarily know the numbers, but I think they're starting to understand more stuff now. And coaches, I don't think ever thought that they needed to know these numbers, but they're out there, and it's more information, and it's more information that you can use to your advantage or try to use to your advantage. So it's kind of a weird catch 22, I think, within a team structure of the NFL, where we work with 22 or 23 NFL teams now. I forget the exact number, but there's front offices that know the numbers and how to use them, and then their biggest obstacle is the communication to the coach. And here, coach, this is how you best use these numbers, or these are the numbers that we have that are gonna, that are helping to shape our opinions. And some coaches are more receptive than others, but I think it's a process, just like it was in a baseball clubhouse. I think if I went to a baseball clubhouse now, which I haven't been in for 5 years, I think more people would understand what WAR means, just like I think NFL players and NFL coaches understand a little bit more on the analytical side of the game than they did maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you would agree with me when I say that more data is never a bad thing, or more information is never a bad thing. But I guess for a lot of people that get hung up on it, there's kind of the application of the data, what it means, or whatever. So where do you think you mentioned coaches, and I'll start with that because I'm definitely going to ask you a little bit about PFF and everything on here while I have you here for this hour. While I'm paying you well to be here.
Yeah, that check better be in the mail.
Absolutely. I sent a Raven this morning, so it'll be there in 3 days.
Perfect.
I think that what's kind of the hang up, um, you think, between like the front offices using the numbers down to the coaches? What do you think is kind of getting in the way there?
I think there's a combination of things. If there's one thing I've learned working with a number of organizations and being in meetings with a number of organizations, it's amazing. I don't want to use the word competency, but it's amazing the different levels of usage that each organization has. So, for instance, I sat down with one of our organizations that I thought was at the forefront of using our stuff, and they are from a front office standpoint. You know, they take our data, they throw it into their video system, and they're able to do all sorts of unbelievable stuff to help them make better decisions. But they don't have the best line of communication with their coaches. So I think one of the hangups is the trust between the front office and the coaching staff. So you almost need this unbelievable point man in an organization to be able to sit down in a meeting with us at PFF, take our data, understand it, and then take that data, interpret it to a coach, and gain the trust of a coach so that they can do something with it. Or even do the same thing with the scouting department, because a lot of our connections are just the quote unquote analytics guy in an organization where the scouting department says, yeah, I guess I'll take your information, but I don't care. And other scouting departments say, yeah, give me that information. That's extremely valuable. So there's just different levels. So one of the teams that I thought did an unbelievable job with our stuff, they had almost zero communication with their coaching staff. So a couple scouting combines ago, the coaching staff came in. It was three guys, and I actually took them through our process, how we go through everything and all that stuff. And they came out of it saying, wow, you guys are football guys. You know, you guys understand what you're looking at. You understand what you're doing. And all of a sudden that started to help us, or help our contact within that organization to uh, earn that trust of the coaching staff, because the coaching staff got to hear from our mouth, hey, we're not just a bunch of, people that don't know what's going on tracking stuff. Like, we know what we're doing. I think we know what we're doing. And we earned that trust with them. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is almost having a guy within the organization that can connect the dots from front office, scouting department to coaching staff. And I think the organizations that use analytics the best are the ones that have that. And it's funny because I see a lot of, I just saw one the other day, a media ranking of which teams use analytics the best. And actually it's the ranking is just based off hearsay and what you
Yeah.
see in the media, and it's so different from what you actually have. There's one team on the list that gets credit for being very analytical, when I just know that they're behind, so to speak. So it is funny, but a lot of it is just having that point. Some organizations have unbelievable liaisons, so to speak, that could take our stuff and get it to the right people and make good use of it.
I'd imagine that, organizational clarity is such a huge thing, between having a clear message between the front office, the scouting department, and then down onto the coaching staff and even into the players. Like, knowing what you're all about as an organization, I feel like is incredibly important, and probably certainly for this process. The one point in there that I found is funny is like that, the term like, oh, you guys are actually all football guys too. And I don't know. I always find that to be like, what the hell does that even mean? I guess, because if there's one thing that I always say, and you can feel free to agree or disagree with me, but I mean, I think the one thing that I always say to people is that, like, this shit's not that complicated. I guess, like, I mean, there's definitely a lot to learn about football. There's a lot that goes into the game, but it's also not. It's not something that's, you're not reading ancient hieroglyphics off the Egyptian pyramids. And I don't know whether you agree or disagree with that statement, but so I always find that funny.
Well, to do what we do, I think you do need intricate understanding of the game, and it's something we're always, trying to do more of, because there are other organizations that track stuff, but they're bigger organizations, and they do football, they do baseball, they do soccer, and so during football season, they have a guy that tracks football stuff, and during soccer season, they have a guy that tracks soccer stuff and baseball stuff and all that. I mean, our life is football, and learning more about football and learning more about each team and all that stuff. So when we're tracking stuff, I think it does take or when we're grading players, it does take an intricate level of detail. And of course, the feedback that we always get is you don't know the play call, you don't know this, you don't know that, you're not in the coaching room. But once the play happens, you have a pretty good idea of what a guy's trying to do. There's always gray areas. There's always, and we always call it maybe a 10 to 15% gray area. Run blocking can be difficult, zone blocking in particular. But I think when you watch thousands and thousands of plays, I think you get a pretty good feel for what a guy's supposed to do on a play. And when we're tracking stuff, we make it a point to never guess if we don't know for sure. So I think to your point, there's hours and hours of detail and planning and all of this stuff, game planning that goes on to run, say, 65 offensive plays on a Sunday. But once that play's run, we have a pretty good idea of what they were supposed to do on that play. I might not know what exactly was said in the coach's room or what intricate detail they added that week for the scheme, but if the player tries to carry it out, if they tries to block somebody in a different way, that whether that took 10 hours of planning or not, I'm watching him do it. I'm watching him try to do it. So I think that's a part of it. And when we use the term football guys, I think it's just we're trying to break down scheme and what guys are trying to do and really understand the game rather than just blindly throwing numbers at the wall. I mean, we just had a meeting yesterday with 10 of us. We watched about 6 outside zone plays in about an hour and a half because we're just trying to really hone in on the nuances of every little bit of that play. And the other thing I'll say, it's like if you said who does Dallas like better, Ezekiel Elliott or Jalen Ramsey, and I'd say I think it's Ezekiel Elliott. They picked Ezekiel Elliott over Jalen Ramsey. I saw them do it, and then you could come back and say, well, you weren't in the draft room, you weren't in the months of meetings, you have no idea what they actually talked about before that. I said, yeah, but they like Ezekiel Elliott better because I saw them pick him over Jalen Ramsey, and I feel like a lot of just general football plays look like that. I don't know the level of detail that went into planning exactly how we're going to block this particular outside zone against this front, but I just saw you do it. You just kind of, showed it to me by how you did it. So that's how I kind of look at there's a lot of nuance and detail to the game, but once plays are run, I think for the most part, you could figure out what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I think it informs my perspective a little bit because I'm not I think I'd like to think I know what the hell I'm talking about at this point with football, but I also am not a football guy. I don't come from a football background. I'm I don't even know what the hell I am, but I think it's funny because I look at so much of player evaluation and organization evaluation, team evaluation, even just offensive defensive evaluation as a behavioral science process because that is my background. That was what my degree was in. That was what I intended to do with my degree after school until I woke up one day and was like, never mind, I'm going to write about football. And so for me, like so much of it is evaluating the individual in the context of what they're being asked to do. And like you said, when you watch enough games, you get a feel of like, yeah, this is what's supposed to happen on the play. Again, that's kind of to my point that it's not something that's not that it's not complicated, but it's not something that anybody can't, that anybody with time and dedication can do. Because I think that for the same thing with evaluating human beings, like if you put the time into it and you have some sort of knack for it, you can do it. So I guess that's my 2 cents on that sort of thought process.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, PFF, I think our big thing is always trying to move forward and always trying to learn. So we have an agreement with a group called the Pro Coaches Network now, and they're going to be they checked a bunch of our grades and plays last year. They're going to be checking every play this season because our goal is continued improvement. So I got to sit down and essentially teach those guys our system last month at one point, and it's amazing. They teach us a little bit. Hey, this guy's actually trying to do this on this play, and keep an eye on that. But we taught them quite a bit too because they're coming from a coaching mentality. And they're watching this guy's technique and a couple other things that we don't really necessarily care about. We're looking at, did you do your job or did you not? Did you, make the block? Did you not? Did you run the right route? Did you not? So he might say, well, that's bad technique. But we're saying, well, he just destroyed a guy on his block. So we're going to give that credit. So it is a good back and forth, but we're always trying to improve, always trying to get a little bit better. But the idea of understanding the game, I think just makes us all better along the way.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about PFF as a and just since we're on the topic right now, we'll just go with this conversation as it is. So we talked a little about PFF as how it relates to NFL teams and coaches, that sort of stuff. But obviously, you guys take a little bit of heat in the public sector too, whether it's other analysts or different media. What are kind of your general thoughts about that? Because I don't really know how to lead into that in any other way.
Are you saying a lot of people saying about our stuff? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm saying that there might be some complaints about PFF in one way or another. I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't know whether you've just muted every factor on Twitter, which I know you have not.
I have our PFF account. I have the mentions right next to mine, so I see every last bit. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of negative feedback because I think we claim to do something that a lot of people don't think is possible. We say we evaluate every player on every play, and it's funny because the PFF started by our founder Neil Hornsby, who is from London, and that's like the underdog story of PFF. A guy from London with three other guys in Europe built this company into what it is, to the point now that we're all relocating to Cincinnati, and Chris Collinsworth invested in it, and we're trying to make it even bigger than it is. But that's kind of the underdog story. But it started because Neil was so mad, and I've heard you say this before, because you're telling me this guy's good, but I don't see it. Announcer, you're telling me this is happening, but that's really not what's happening. So it was like Neil went to this ridiculous length to prove everybody wrong, and he feeds off when people tell him that he can't do something. So there's no way you can evaluate every player on every play in the NFL, and I feel like we've gotten to a point where we do a pretty good job of it. So that was kind of the crux of what led into things. But I think that's where the negative feedback comes from, is because when you do that, you have an opinion. So obviously we put out a grade that says this is how well the guy played. That's how our system has evaluated this particular player, and essentially it's an opinion. It's coming from us. It's an opinion, and then people comment on that, whether it's Johnny diehard fan on a Monday morning saying, I just watched this game, what are you looking at, this guy was way better than you just said, or whether it's the general manager of a team or a coach trying to protect their players, which, by the way, I would do as well. If one of my guys just got a terrible grade and reporters are asking me about it on a Tuesday morning, I would defend him too and say, well, PFF doesn't know what they're talking about. Of course, take it with a grain of salt. But I think that just comes with the territory. It's part of what we do. And I think the only thing that we could do is continue to educate and further explain our process. I think that's something we can always do a better job of. I try to be as cordial as possible on Twitter when responding to people and say, look, this is what we're seeing. We're not inherently biased against your team. I know everybody runs into that. We're not inherently biased against this player. If you're asking us to add different context to it, yes, we encourage using context. Hey, this guy had a negative grade, but he had a bad hand, and it was raining, and this. Add context any way you want, but we also have to stay true to the system that is evaluating players. So, yeah, there's plenty of negative feedback, both on the media side, from a fan perspective. There's feedback, there's positive and negative feedback within the NFL. I think that's natural. I've had to sit down with general managers who say, what do you guys do? And there's only been, very rarely have I come out of a meeting where even our biggest detractors, I'm talking general managers, who say, you can't do what you do and you don't know what you're doing. I've never come out of a meeting where they have not at least respected our process, respect the level of detail that we go into. I've been in one meeting where a guy was not receptive, but a prominent name within the football industry. I won't go into who it was, but there was only one person that essentially came out of a meeting and had just as little respect for us as he did before, but I don't think he wanted to learn it anyway. So that was kind of his old school mentality. But almost everywhere else, I think we've earned the trust and the respect of plenty of people, both around the league and with fans too. I think Twitter, in what we do, no fans are going to tweet at us and say, hey man, those are great grades. Great grades on my team. yesterday, that's exactly what I saw. We get one of those for every 20 negative tweets, and it's more just the nature of what we do, because we're saying this is what happened, and sometimes it doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't match up with the eye test all the time, or in the eye test is often the highlight test in the brain, what your brain remembers. So if it doesn't match up with what you think you saw, we're going to hear about it. But I think you stay true to the system, and I think we've had pretty good results through the years too, as far as showing which players are good and which players are maybe a little overhyped.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, it's an opinion, it's something that's out there. And I think the tough part, what people get up in arms about whenever you're evaluating or grading a player, is that you're putting it out there as like, nope, this is, the Bible of this or that or the other. And I think that, I've gotten heat about that plenty of times with like reception perception. I'm like, listen, this is just my opinion. I just happen to think it's a good, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way.
You believe in your opinion, right? You can't be
right.
Like, hey, here's my opinion that I think is 20% correct.
Right.
You have to believe in what you're putting out there, of course.
Especially when it's a detailed like methodology and process, then
exactly.
You have to believe in the process. You have to believe in all that. And otherwise, why the hell are you doing it? You would just write traditional scouting reports like anybody else. I'm like, yeah, right. This is an opinion that I believe in, and I just happen to think it's presented and quantified in a better way than the points about that he's good at this or bad at that, or whatever. Right. And I think that people get caught up in that. And I mean, yeah, there's always and context is important, and I think that you guys wouldn't deny that or anything either. That it is important. So kind of what I think my brain is working around here. Do you ever get kind of frustrated with the way that outsiders that aren't, PFF, whether it's media or fans or whatever, how they use the grades or the data in order to do something? Has there ever been a situation where you've been frustrated by that?
Yeah, but more on like on a smaller scale level. It's difficult because the easiest way for people to consume our stuff is in one number, right? I mean, I do this. I work hours and hours and hours a week. So if I was to try, I have the time to go find the context. Where did it come from? Which games did it come from? Did it all come from one or two games? So I have the time to go find that context. Most fans don't. So it's easier to consume in one number. So when a lot of people just throw a number out there and say, this guy's a plus 28, therefore he's awesome. And I'm like, actually, you know what? He did that against, in only two games against these two guys. Like, I know the added context. I have intimate knowledge of the process and stuff like that. So I can understand why people actually get frustrated by people just taking that one number and running with it, and using that as the only way to define a player. Because I think as an evaluator, the numbers, it's big. It puts you in a ballpark. But if one guy's a couple points away from another guy, it doesn't mean that so much better by a couple points. It's a very small, limited difference. So I think on a small scale, when I hear stuff, it's more I try to add whatever context I know and that I can add to make people understand it a little bit more. I think that's where I get frustrated. I do get frustrated when people we're talking about or we don't know this or that, sure, because I don't think they understand the like I said, the level of detail that we've gone to, the sit downs we've had with former NFL coaches where they've come out of it absolutely amazed that we can evaluate players at that level of detail, down to the this block, that block, and the various things that we do. So that would be I think that would be the most frustrating part, is when the work that we do, whether you agree or not. I mean, we have internal discussions all the time about players and grade came from and just how valuable his skill set is versus another one. We always debate players all the time, but the most frustrating parts is little bits here and there, and then people trying to diminish what we do.
Yeah, I think so. And the like you being able as the analyst to add the context, and that's your job. That's our job. That's our jobs. Like,
oh yeah.
I can tell, like, I can show you plenty of reception perception charts, but it's like my job as an analyst to be able to then convey that like through writing in a reasonable manner. And of course, a lot of people don't like to read or don't like to
People
go
don't
through.
want to read the writing. They just give me the list, man. Just give me the
Yeah.
top 10. And I don't care about what your reasoning is. I mean, it's like people read the headline all the time. So and so is not good, but you give this 3-paragraph explanation of what he needs to improve upon and how close he is, but people read, well, you said he's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of just one last question on the PFF thing, and then I promise we'll move on. We'll take the exhale and we'll talk about you. I think the one thing that I've never because I'll admit I've had plenty of questions about PFF and this and that, but I have questions about everything. I have questions about why my dog does what he does. So I think, but the one thing I've never really been up in arms about, but that other people are, is like, and it kind of plays off that being able to have the context, is the fact that you guys, obviously took away the premium stats or the things aren't available to the public like they used to be. I've never been bothered by that because I'm like, yeah, dude, that's business, man. But do you ever find yourself kind of in those situations where people are frustrated about that, and how do you react to it?
Yeah, I mean, to be candid, we made a decision last year to take our $27 premium stat product and pull it because we thought it was more valuable in other spaces. Those other spaces being, we actually had NFL teams. Every NFL team at least had a $27 package. All 32 teams had that. Then we have 22 other clients that pay for that's about 2% of what they pay for. I mean, they're paying for our database and integration into their video system and all this other stuff. So it wasn't necessarily hindering NFL sales, but we had teams that they needed to keep up with what players are doing, so they subscribed. And then we had networks and bigger entities that ultimately would pay a lot more than $27 for it. So it was a business decision that we had to make. And to be honest, I was mad about it because I thought that we had built up a pretty good fan base, but ultimately I was proven wrong. And I would look at it like this. For the people that are up in arms, I would say, because I used to be that person. I told you I joined PFF because it from free, they went from free to $100, and I just wanted these stats. I'm like, I'm just a fan. I'm a minor league baseball player. I make $1,200 a month playing baseball, and we only get paid 5 months a year. I'm not paying $100 for this thing. So I joined the company. So ultimately, it was a good move by them. I think they got my services, but so I've been on the other side of it too as a fan. But I would say for those that paid $27 for it, you were getting something that we've just discovered in the past year was actually worth thousands. Sold it for a much higher price, and it's a difficult business decision, but it's one that we kind of had to make. And I think the way we tried to make up for it was in our writing and really trying to advance what we do on the media side of things, and putting more of our analysts into writing and videos, and as you mentioned earlier, adding context to our numbers. So I think that's where we are right now as a company. It's our job to try to educate with our stuff as much as possible, even though you can't necessarily subscribe to it right away. So I understand the angst, and we're doing some other things. We have some other things in the works. I think we're going to open it up to certain people in certain places. But it's a product that was worth way more than $27, and it was proven within the last year that it's worth a lot more than $27. So I think that's just kind of the nature of doing business. And I know it's difficult for maybe the common fan at times, but I think we're trying to build some other things that hopefully can make up and fill that space.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's never something that like bothered me, because it's just, that's you're doing, everybody's doing things to make to make a profit off it, man. And like, if this is a decision that helps you guys, I mean, shit, then do what you got to do. But so Steve, this will be the end of the PFF grilling section of the podcast.
That's all right. I could do it all day, man. I love our company. I love where we're going, and I understand the questions that come with it.
Oh no, for sure. But I think you did a good job of answering them, and I appreciate you being candid. And if you pick up anything of my vibe, I'm not much of a an attacker. If there was a different podcast host, I'm sure they could go at you for hours and hours and hours about this stuff. But I do somewhat similar work to you guys as well too, as far as just charting things for one position. So I get some of the things, like I've said, I've had my criticisms and my questions and this, that, and the other and I'm sure you guys would have the same with me. I know there's a few players that we've disagreed on, and but to me, it's just like, I get some of what you guys get, and it is what it is. I'm obviously a little bit of a smaller entity too, as in terms of I'm not a big company where nobody's paying thousands of dollars for the reception perception results. I'll tell you that. But
Someday, never know.
you never know. But it is what it is. But so Steve, I kind of wanted to focus a little bit more on you as an individual analyst here for a little bit. You mentioned writing and adding more context, of course, which is important. We talked about, but how do you think that because you kind of come from a baseball background and being really analytics heavy, how has your writing developed in terms of as a craft or being able to explain things? Is that something that was a natural instinct for you, or did you have to kind of learn it?
Yeah, I think I always kind of. I'm not saying it's natural. I don't think I'm a great writer. I think I can write with, say, the PFF tone, so to speak. I think I know how to take and interpret it so that it makes sense to the common fan, and say, here's what we've seen and here's what it means. So I think I've done an okay at interpreting our data through writing. I wouldn't say that I'm a great writer, so to speak, but when we hire people, when they hired me in 2011 as a part-timer doing that player stuff, writing was always just a side job for us. It's, do a couple games, get paid by the game, and oh, by the way, you can write some game recaps and you can write a couple things as they come up. And I think if you go back and see my work in 2011 when I first got hired, there's it's better. I hope I think it's evolved, but I think it's more about from a football sense, it's knowing what you're talking about. I mean, if you just watched, all of the receivers in the draft class, you should have really good knowledge of those guys, and then how well can you portray that information? And I think that's the more I've understood our system, how we grade, how we do stuff, the better I've become as a writer, because I have more intimate knowledge of our system and can then convey those thoughts. So I think that's been the biggest thing, and you continue to develop in part based off just how your knowledge increases, and just how hard you work. I mean, if I try to write, or if you tried to write about the receiver draft class and you just watched one game of each guy, you're not going to have as much to write about. You're not going to have as much knowledge to actually put on, to type, to display to people. So I do think the harder you work and the more information you can gather, the better you'll become as well, because you just have offer.
Yeah, for sure. So what was it, in your opinion, or if somebody's actually told you, what was it that you think that set you apart from being just, the run of the mill, basic player participation charter, to now being, a senior analyst? It's in the title. And we were talking about this before we started recording. You're going to be managing the college football team. What has it been about you that has helped you make that continual progress jump up?
Yeah, that's a good question. PFF's evolved so much since I first joined, and in 2011 we had 4 full-time employees and we had 15 part-time player participation analysts. That was my recruiting class, so to speak. And then in 2012 I got my first full-time job. I was the 5th full-time employee with the company, and now we're closing in on 50, 60, 70. I don't even know where we are with just full-timers and hundreds of part-timers. So I think to get to that point, I think it was what I said earlier, was I took that passion that I had, which used to toward getting better at baseball. I refocused it on learning everything I could about football. I think that was me, is, when we evaluate our part-timers now, it's, how much work are you doing? So it's how many games are you doing? How much writing are you doing? How much are you conveying your thoughts to us that you know what you're talking about? And I think initially I did a good job of conveying that to the 4 people that were full time at the time, that I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about our system, how to grade it, how to evolve it. That's been a big thing too. Our lead analyst, I think he has moments where he absolutely hates me because I always tell him, hey, we could do this a little bit better, we could do this a little bit better, we could add this to the process. So I've helped shape the process through my own and my own passion for what we're doing. So, like you said, you don't have room in your head for other sports, and I was a baseball guy, and I don't know anything about baseball because my passion is knowing every single thing about every college and NFL player right now that I possibly can. So if you could put that type of dedication and passion toward what you're doing, I think that's how you get ahead. And I think that's how I initially earned a full-time job here, and that's how I've been able to grow within the company. And it's been fun to watch the company evolve from a small. It was a small company where there was really 6 or 7 of us running the place, from editing articles to doing the player participation to doing the analysis to doing the writing, to the point where we could now have more focused jobs where, again, I can college process, our NFL draft process, and I could trust other people to do some of the other stuff. So that part's been fun. But I think, the 6 or 7 of us that helped shape the company, it's because we did a little of everything, and we worked ridiculous hours. I mean, our in-season hours would be Sunday at 1 through midnight. I mean, I slept 3 hours a night, and we worked nonstop. And that's just how we built the company to be where it is. And that was the type of work ethic that we had as a company to kind of get where we are. So I think that's all been a big part of it. And we try to hire people that have that same mindset, that have that same passion. And I think that's where we end up finding our best people.
Yeah, it's funny. People ask me how do you get ahead, and not even just how do you get started, but then how do you progress in the industry, and it's sometimes it really is as simple as being the hardest working man or woman in the room, like just be when you're the hardest working person, people will know it. They'll know that you're all about it. You don't have to remind everybody if you really are working that hard. By the way,
bosses have a funny way of knowing what you do and knowing how much you produce. I mean, find out what your boss is most passionate about, do it. Like my bosses or the people that run PFF are passionate about getting games done quickly and accurately. So that's what we focus on the most. And the people that are the quickest and the most accurate, I'm not the quickest, but I feel like I'm pretty accurate. But the guys that are the quickest and the most accurate, simple. I mean, find out what makes your boss's life easier and be the best at that. And that gets noticed, and that's where you move up. It's tough to fake it.
It certainly is. Unfortunately, in NFL media, they always talk about snackable content, and if there's one thing I'm bad at, it is the snackable content. Yeah. I'm a big long form writer, so that's why Matt Harmon will always be at the little low levels of the fantasy world. But that's a topic.
No, Matt, you find out, you get better at it. You take your weakness, get better at it. I don't care what Josh Norris says. Weaknesses can become strengths. You go figure out a way to make better snackable content and do a lot of it, and you get noticed.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens, but I'm going to definitely make that the title of the episode. I don't care what Josh Norris, episode 27, Steve Palazzolo. I don't care what Josh Norris says.
That is a perfect title. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve, just a few more questions here as we're winding down. I really appreciate your time. If there's one thing I know I've kind of noticed about you, and you kind of have a little bit of a different vibe on social media, I feel like, and again, tell me I'm an idiot if I am. Normally people do. I feel like you kind of have a little bit of a different vibe on social media than the rest of the PFF guys. What? And again, I could be totally wrong, but I don't know. You give off a very chill, normal person sort of vibe. What goes into your approach with social media, especially because, like you mentioned, people don't always like what you have to say.
I think you have to trust. I heard you say this on one of the other podcasts, right? Stay true to yourself, right? If you come across as defensive, if you come across as argumentative, I just don't think you need to do that at this point. I mean, again, to be candid, in the past, I think when I started with PFF, we were like we were trying to make a name for ourselves. And I think when a big media person would say, well, that's stupid, what does PFF know? We would kind of have to rally the troops and say, well, here's what we know. We grade every player on every play, and we know what we're doing and all this stuff. We'd almost have to, stand up for ourselves, little brother. And I'm not saying we've arrived or anything close to that, but I think we've also evolved to the point where we get more. You have more followers, you get more criticism. I don't think it's increased as a percentage, but you get more criticism, and you have to understand that comes with the territory. But now, not only do we get more criticism, but we also have more people defending us. And we have 200,000 Twitter followers, and I'm not saying every single one of them loves us, but you have a few of them step up and say, "No, I've seen their work through the years. I trust it. They put the hard work in. They've seen more than you have. Whatever, however they position it." So where in the past, I think we had to take this defensive. I feel like we've evolved to the point where we do have credibility. So every time people tell us we've lost our credibility every single week of the NFL season, from an Aaron Rodgers slight negative grade when he threw 5 touchdowns to whatever it is, but we stay true to the process, and I don't think we've lost credibility. I think we've increased it, both with fans and within the NFL. I know that. So I try to take that approach and say, and I think the more I can explain, I mean, I get into arguments all the time about player evaluation, because I think this player is worse than you think he is, and here's why. And I think if the more you explain your thought process, the more people respect you, even if they don't agree with your take. And it's okay to disagree, and it's okay for big names or small names to disagree. So I try to take that approach, and I also take the approach that every single one of the people that I interact with is a potential customer, a potential reader, and a potential person that I don't want to say can be swayed, but if you just go on the attack and on the defensive, that person might not come back, read your work, or become a potential customer, however you want to put it. So I think you earn a lot of respect when you handle things the right way, and that's how I've tried to approach it, and that's how I try to get some of our other analysts to approach things as well, is trust our work, believe in it, but explain what we see and how we see it. And I think a lot of people respect you more in the long term.
Yeah, man, like absolutely. If there's one thing that annoys me is when like you see writers like be rude to their followers or whatever. I'm like, dude, these are the guys keeping the food on your table, man. Like these are your readers, I guess. So for me, I appreciate that approach. And I've also said several times on the podcast, like my distaste lately for debate that goes, yeah, well, I think this. Well, yeah, well, I think that. And I'm just not interested in doing that. But like, that's what I respect about you on Twitter and other people like that, is that, it's more about like explaining things and putting context behind it and going into detail, less so than getting into like I don't know, what I would think of as like a traditional debate, but that's just me. Steve, kind of final 2 questions here. One, I've been asking people lately on the show, what's something that you see in the industry, maybe not PFF related, but just in general, that you see that you don't really like?
I think the only thing I don't like is when of each other, similar to not treating each other with. Here's what I see within the industry. I see people that the intention for this podcast is for up and coming writers and for new people and people trying to get into the industry. I guess the one thing I would say that I don't like is when people disrespect each other. People that can do something for them down the road. And, so we're PFF. We work with ESPN. We have an agreement with ESPN. We do some insider stuff. If I went out there and I was tweeting negatively, post something, and, even though it's not like everybody at ESPN knows me, I'm writing with their insider team. So I know some time, Mel, Todd McShay, John Gruden offer. What does that do for me? That's ESPN. That's a potential partner. It's a current partner. It makes no sense. At the same point, PFF is a company that young writers and young people at some point down the road. So when you are critical of us, we see all of that. everybody's at these different levels. So, you're at the NFL. If people are going to be critical, you mentioned it before, Daniel Jeremiah and who that stuff. And that resonates with me. I've seen it with agents, to be honest, too. Work with agents. We are agents' best friends. Information that their client is good, then they love us. But if they're critical of us along the way, on the road, they're like, hey, give me some information about my client, about how good he is. Why am I going to give that to you if you were critical to us on social media? So if there's one thing, I think it's that, and showing respect and just not, it's not even burning bridges, but it's just disrespect to people that could eventually helping you out down the road. You never know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing. You never know what another person can do for you. And I think that is a super important point for sure. Steve, well, I really appreciate your time today. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed our conversation. But I always give the guest one last shot at the floor before I yank it out from under you. So the floor is yours to say whatever, whether it's advice to aspiring writers or people in the space or, whatever is on your mind, the floor is yours.
I never know what to say. None of your guests have really loved this part of it, right?
No, but I keep doing it. I don't care.
You still do it. I don't know. I just think a summation of everything we've talked about. I love this concept that you have here, and I think it's attracted all different types of listeners and outside the industry. I think there's a lot I've learned a lot from listening to you guys too. Everybody's coming at it from a slightly different angle. I think there's a lot of just general business be learned from a lot of this stuff. So, harping on the last point I made, respect social media. One thing I learned early in my baseball career is if you want to connect to quote unquote important people, you can just kind of do it. When I first got into it, big name in baseball, and I simply emailed him and asked him to look at my mechanics, and he ended up getting me my first job with the Milwaukee Brewers. Essentially, he set me up with a tryout with them, and Will Caroline, that I said, wow, he responded to me through email, and connecting pitching coaches early in my reaching out. And I think it's easier to do that nowadays with social media. It was a lot harder in, say, the mid 2000s where you had to have emails and whatever. But reach out, connect, and you never how that's going to work. But try to network as best you can using all of this social media. But of course, like I said, do it in a respectful way, and do it in a way that it's good light on you. Into a podcast earlier today with Yogi Roth, the Lead 11. When they talk to these quarterbacks, they say, what of yourself as a person? Who are you as a person? And the quarterback will describe who he is, and then they'll go through his social media and they get a completely different vibe from what this guy wants to be. You say you're this, you're do this and that. Well, you just tweeted about the party you went to and whatever. So social media is probably more important than your actual resume nowadays. So treat that as such, and however you want to be portrayed, good, bad, to be portrayed, I think you have to, treat social media like that. And I know it's not always fun, but important stuff. Goals are, I think that's important stuff today, and it's a lot different than it was 10 years ago, and it's going to continue to evolve. It's that social blueprint, so to speak, or that your track record is really important. So I think that's all important stuff, and I guess that's my parting words of.
Absolutely. Well, hey, present the self that you'd like people to see of you. I think that is the message behind social media. Well, Steve, again, thank you so much for coming on today. This was, again, a real big treat for me. And everybody make sure to keep up with Steve and the PFF team. I know that they just moved into this nice big office that I'm looking at here on the other end of the Google Hangout. And so they have a lot of big things coming. And I think hopefully if you've listened today and you've had some questions about PFF, I think Steve did a really good job of answering them. So this was a lot of fun. And to all you listeners, thank you so much for tuning in every week and putting up with me. I really appreciate that. And of course, if you would continue to rate and review the podcast on iTunes, share the show, all those little self-promotional things that I have to say here at the end. There they go. They're out. But again, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you learned something today.